I mean, I think the number one piece of career leverage is working on the right thing. And when I say that, I mean it's working on the thing that lights you up. Like it's working on the most important thing. I think it was Stephen Covey, the author, that said the main thing is keeping the main thing the main thing. It's like a funny tongue-in-cheek comment, but it's very true. It's like figure out what that main thing is and focus on it and say no to everything else. Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger are famous for talking about this. They don't, try to jump over every single hurdle. They try to find like the one, a couple inches high and just step over it, like the really easy, main important thing they should be focusing on.
Sahil Bloom, live from New York City. It's great to see you.
Clay, I'm stoked to be here, man. This is awesome. Glad we're finally getting to do it in person. And this is my long-awaited return to your podcast because I definitely recorded one. I mean, this goes way back to 2020 probably, and have been a listener since I started my career in finance back in 2014, 2015.
Yeah, I want to start there actually because, you've had a very interesting kind of career transitions. You started out, I guess before you started your career in PE, you were a college baseball player and you were very focused on that. And then you went into PE and, you were very successful at that. And then you seemingly made this transition to, building a very successful newsletter, having a following of over 1 million people, and then building these businesses around that I'd like to talk about as well. And it's built around that foundation of having that huge following. And you've talked about how working in private equity, it was a great career path, but it wasn't the path for you. And I ran across something very similar in my own life, and I'm sure many in our audience are questioning whether, they're on the right path. So I was curious if you could walk us through your thought process on how you decide if a line of work is right for you or not.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's no easy answer to this. It's a real self-reflection process over a long period of time. And the way it works in my mind is that careers tend to have this gravitational pull that accelerates over time. And so if you start down a career path like private equity as an example, or investment banking or hedge funds, all these areas of investing, they have a natural plus an actually compensation oriented gravitational pull. And what I mean by that is, year one, you could easily leave, you can make a change, and it's not a huge deal to go jump. Year 5, it's quite a bit harder. You've built all this institutional knowledge, so that's this natural gravitational pull, and your compensation starts to be tied to these long dated things. In the private equity world, you start getting into the carried interest of the fund, which means, probably a 5 to 7 year vesting period on that carried interest. So people tend to stay in order to actually reap the economic rewards. So making changes later and later on in your career in those tracks becomes very difficult psychologically and economically, especially, if you have kids, you have mortgages, bills to pay, things like that. So what happens is people tend to stay on these paths. And oftentimes that's a real shame because oftentimes it's not something they really want to be doing. They don't love it. It doesn't light them up. They don't get a ton of energy out of it. And really that was my story, was I was having a great time with the people and with the learning, but the work wasn't really for me. Absolutely loved the firm, thought it was an exceptional group, and we were making some cool investments, but the actual work long-term was not going to be something that I looked back on my life and said, oh my God, I'm so glad that I did that with my one precious life. And if not for COVID, frankly, I probably would have just done that. And it would have been one of those situations where I woke up in, 30, 40 years and said what the hell just happened? I just did that. I made a bunch of money. So people would have patted me on the back along the way and I would have looked successful, quote unquote. But I wouldn't have actually felt fulfilled by the thing I was doing on a day-to-day basis. And so as I think, as I give advice to younger people that are starting their careers, I just think that it's the time of your life in those early years to explore broadly. Before that gravitational field starts to really pull you down into a single path, before you have all the responsibilities of kids, of mortgages, of all these bills, it's the perfect time to go and explore. Derek Thompson, the writer at The Atlantic, talks about this model that he has that's explore, then exploit, from a career perspective. And I think that's so sharp because basically it says, in those early years, you explore and you can spend a year or two somewhere, go jump ship, go do something else, try a different thing. all of this like exploration that happens. And then once you figure out what you really love, once you figure out what you get a ton of energy from, which is really going to be the thing that you actually excel at the most long term too, that's when you exploit. That's when you go deep on the one opportunity.
Mm-hmm. And I think this relates well to something you've said in the past. You said before you join the game, always ask first, do I know the game I'm playing? And second, do I want the prize for winning that game? And I think that's such an insightful way of thinking about it. And whether that game, suits your goals, your skill sets, your knowledge, and, the lifestyle you want, because, a PE type lifestyle, there's so much of the external side that plays in where like externally it looks like you're doing very well, but internally is where you really have to do that reflection that you mentioned.
Yeah. The idea of the video game is one, like the analogy of the video game is just one I love because it applies really directly to a lot of things that you end up pursuing in life. Oftentimes, the like quest you're on, if you will, is something that you've kind of defaulted into. Like you're in college, you're taking classes, everyone around you starts recruiting to go to investment banks or consulting firms. If you're working, if you're studying economics or business, like that's usually what like the high performing kids are starting to want to go into. And so you just assume like, oh, that's what I should focus on. I should focus on going into consulting so that I can get into private equity or so that I can get into hedge fund world or so that I can get into banking, whatever it is. And you step into that by default. You never really thought about, oh, okay, do I actually love what that game looks like? Do I love what the prize at the end of that game looks like, etc. You just have jumped into it. And then if you close your eyes, you'll wake up in 20 years and you'll have that feeling that you climbed a mountain, you got to the top, got to the end of the video game, whatever it is, you won it, and you'll say, oh, I actually didn't want to win that game. The prize wasn't something that I really wanted. And so for me, COVID was like the shock to the system that forced me to actually take a step back and think about that exact thing. Was I enjoying the game I was playing? And was I going to be happy with winning that game, what the prize looked like at the end? And I think it was for a lot of people. I mean, you saw the Great Resignation was like this huge movement, right? Hundreds of thousands of people resigned, quit their job, left, moved, did all these big, big changes. And I think the biggest reason in my mind was just because it was the first time they had actually had the space to think about it. I mean, you really, on a day-to-day basis, you were so busy and you were taking pride in being busy for most of these people that you never had the space to actually think about those questions and actually like zoom out and look at the bigger picture of the things you were doing. And so with the whole world starting to shift to remote and hybrid and having the opportunities to actually think about those questions, people came to a lot of different conclusions than what they otherwise would have.
Mm-hmm. And you've also talked a lot about the importance of leverage when it comes to career success. You've mentioned your father who was or is a professor, which you described as something that's lower leverage because oftentimes the way to excel is contributing more time and you only have so much time in a week or in a day. The path you've taken in recent years is very, very high leverage. So when you're looking at a specific career, what types of leverage can exist that we can utilize to our advantage?
I mean, I think the number one piece of career leverage is working on the right thing. And when I say that, I mean it's working on the thing that lights you up. Like it's working on the most important thing. Like I think it was Stephen Covey, the author, that said the main thing is keeping the main thing the main thing. It's like a funny tongue-in-cheek comment, but it's very true. It's like figure out what that main thing is and focus on it and say no to everything else. Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger are famous for talking about this, like famous for the idea of they don't, try to jump over every single hurdle. They try to find like the one that's like, a couple inches high and just step over it. Like the really easy, main important thing they should be focusing on. Warren Buffett has this like, famous story of him talking to his pilot, who's bemoaning, his, kind of lack of progress against all of his career goals. And so Warren Buffett asked him to write down his top 20 career goals on a piece of paper. And he writes them down. He writes down 20 things. And he's like, okay, now circle the top 5 things on that list. And the guy circles the top 5 on the list. And then he says like, okay, that's your priority list. And what are you going to do with the other 20? And the guy's like, well, I'll focus on those after I get through these 5. And Buffett says, no, that's your problem. What it is that those 20 things that you didn't circle are your avoid at all costs list. Like you should always say no to those things because they are not the main thing. They are not the priority item. And I think most of us need to go through a similar exercise to that. Figure out what your main thing is, what your most important thing is, and just spend all your time on that and say no to everything else that comes along the way.
You also have this concept for those that are on a path they actually want to be on. You refer to it as swallowing the frog.
Yeah.
And it's
a gross metaphor.
yeah, yeah. Well, I think about just so many people I've sort of ran across. It's just easy to be the guy that does as little as possible just to get by, just to just enough to get the promotion. But you're flipping on its head where you're trying to figure out, okay, what's the biggest problem I can solve for my boss? So talk more about this.
Yeah, I mean, there's been this like in vogue movement in general. I don't know, probably over the last like 5 or 10 years of like strategic incompetence is good, or like work smart, not hard. Like all of this advice that's given to young people about hard work being overrated. And my general opinion on that kind of stuff is it's a bull market phenomenon. Like people start saying hard work is overrated. You should probably like sell whatever equities you have, because it's like it's time for the cycle to turn. And I think that actually has played out. Like I think 2020, 2021 was when everyone started like peak market saying hard work is overrated. Everyone's wearing casual clothes. My mind, and it comes from my athlete background, is like hard work is never overrated. I've never seen something bad come from working hard. Like something always happens. You might not actually excel at the one thing you were working hard at, but something good comes from it. I always was taught that by my parents. And when you're starting out in your career, the swallow the frog concept is the idea that there's something that your boss hates doing. Your job when you start your career is to figure out what that is, learn how to do it, and take it off their plate. And if you do nothing else your first year of work other than that, you will put a win on the board and you will make career progress. And in my mind, it's just like the most tried and true and the easiest way to guarantee that you continue to make progress in those early years of your career. It's like figure out what they hate doing, take it off their plate, learn to do it well, and just start doing it. And if you keep doing that, if you develop a reputation for being reliable, for working hard, and for basically just getting done, it's very hard to go wrong early in your career doing that.
Mm-hmm. Just before we started recording here, you mentioned that you were listening to Preston and Stig early on. And I think a lot of their success was people tuned into the show and they just see that there's no hidden agenda here. They're very authentic and they're very, they want to help people and they want to educate people as much as they can. And when I look at a lot of what you're doing, I think authenticity is a really, really important thing. So I wonder if you could expand more on your thoughts around this.
Yeah, I think it's very hard to excel at anything that you don't authentically care about. And that goes to my point earlier of like working on the right thing, the thing that really lights you up that you're going to get excited about. And so when I think about like content as an example of like the path I started going down, I knew that I had to create content around things that I actually cared about. Because if I was, writing hacky stuff about like, hey, here are a bunch of TED Talks that are amazing, or like, here's some Chat GPT prompts that'll change your life, or here are some Chrome extensions that'll change your life. Like if I was doing that, I would have burned out so damn fast. And it might have worked. Like I might have like grown really quickly out of the gate or done something really, flash in the pan type success. But you can't do that over long periods of time if you don't actually care about it. It's one thing if I'm obsessed with AI and I'm like immersed in it and spending time around it, and so I'm writing about that. But I knew that what I needed to be sharing were things that were authentic to me, things that I was genuinely struggling with, that I was figuring out, better ways to approach. And so as I thought about, my own trajectory around content, around creating impact with the content I was doing, I knew that to have longevity, it had to be real, credible, and authentic for me. And I'm not an 80-year-old. I don't have wisdom from the last 60 years of my career. So what I share is things that I'm struggling with on a daily basis. When I'm writing, anything about these frameworks, mental models, like different ideas for ways to live your life in a better way, they're all things that I am personally wrestling with in real time. And that I feel like I've started to figure out a better way to think about, or the questions a little bit better, whatever it might be. I'm not sharing like, hey, do this, like teach, I'm going to teach you the exact thing. I'm sharing something real about my life. And I think that comes across, and it's what has been a big driver for me of the growth and really like the steadiness of the growth. I haven't had like one thing that has vaulted me from 0 to 1 million, or like one thing that took me from 0 to 500,000. It was just showing up every single week, with new ideas, new insights that were authentic and credible and real for me. Mm-hmm. Have you ever heard the story of Max Planck and his chauffeur? It's related to this, so humor me. So there's this story about Max Planck, the German theoretical physicist, and his chauffeur. And basically the story goes like this. Max Planck wins the Nobel Prize, and he starts touring around Germany giving this one lecture about his theories and the things that he had worked on. The same chauffeur is driving him to all these lectures, and so he's preparing in the car and doing all of these presentations. The chauffeur is there watching all of them. About a month goes by, a ton of these talks, and the chauffeur says to him on the ride to one of the lectures, hey, I've heard you do this same lecture over and over and over again. I can actually go up and do this lecture. I've memorized it. So why don't you let me go up on stage and do the lecture at this one? No one will know. You wear my chauffeur hat. I'll go up and deliver the presentation as Max Planck, the famous theoretical physicist. So he goes up on stage, the chauffeur does. Max Planck puts on the chauffeur hat. The chauffeur goes up on stage, gives the entire lecture beautifully, like perfectly memorized it, gives this lecture on theoretical physics incredibly well. Applause comes, and at the very end, it's in Munich, a professor stands up and asks a pretty simple question. And the chauffeur looks at him and says, that question is just so rudimentary. I would have expected much more from an audience in such a sophisticated city as Munich. I'm actually going to allow my chauffeur to answer that question because it's so simple. So it's this hilarious, tongue-in-cheek story, obviously. And the moral of it, actually, is there are really two types of knowledge. There's real knowledge, which is what Max Planck had, and then there's chauffeur knowledge, which is fake. It's flimsy, right? It's nothing. He memorized it. And you either know the thing or you know how to talk about the thing, and it's a totally separate thing. And so what I've always thought about is I want to develop real skills, real knowledge, and real insights. And that applies to everything in life, if you think about it. It applies to, obviously, if you're learning new things, learning new skills, you want to have the real depth that goes beyond that surface level. But it also applies to relationships. It applies to building a deep relationship, something that goes beyond the surface level. You can't fake that. You have to go and earn it. It has to be earned through hours and hours and hours of work at that thing. So with a relationship, it has to be earned through real depth, conversations, connection, whether it's with your kid, with your partner, whatever it is. Fitness, you have to earn the level of depth. You can't have some hacky, fitness belt that zaps your abs to have a six pack. It doesn't work. You have to go and earn it. And so I just think about that so often, with everything that I'm pursuing, I want to be developing the real depth, not just that surface level thing that sounds good.
This hits on another point that you've talked a lot about recently, is this idea of, something that has to be earned, and rather than something that can be bought. You can go buy a mansion, you can go buy various things, you can go buy an NFL team, but every day you're chasing those things that you have to earn. And, you have that saying where rent is due every day and you're showing up and, paying your dues.
Yeah. Yeah. I think Naval was the one that I first saw talk about, I think he said a fit body, a calm mind, and a house full of love as things that have to be earned, that can't be bought. And it really started making me think about the difference between earned status and bought status. And we're hardwired societally to chase status. It's, how we align ourselves in society. There's a lot of purpose behind status, actually, in terms of how we all organize and communicate. And that's fine. But my idea is basically that you should be focusing on earned versus bought. The bought status things, they lead to this unbelievably unhappy chase because you can never have enough. You get the mansion and then there's someone with a bigger mansion. You need to go get that. You get the boat and then there's someone with a yacht and you have to go get that. And there's always this sensation that you're not enough when you're doing things that are chasing that bought status. Whatever you have, there's someone that has more. Earned status, on the other hand, has a lot more depth to it. It's a lot more fulfilling. When you go and achieve something, I just trained for this marathon, and running a sub 3 hour marathon is sort of a status thing, right? It's you broke this big barrier around it. So I really wanted to do that. And it was a goal that had, no real impact on my life, right? There was no reason for me to go and do something like that. But to me, it was this earned status thing. I was going to have to work. I was going to have to run 1,000 miles in training in order to try to get to that level from a standstill where I was starting. And so that, to me, when I went out and did it, I was it's an earned status thing. I feel proud to share this because I know what went into it. I know what was behind it.
I want to touch more on the marathon a little bit later, but
yeah, we can get back to it.
So one of the things I really admire about you, and I think, you see a lot of parallels in the way we try and operate here at the Investors Podcast, is just how long-term you think. You recently had a newsletter write-up where you talked about your 3 forever holds, or 3 things you're investing in forever. And those are purpose-driven work, your relationships, and your personal health. And you're not just saying these things just to say them. You're actually living this out. And I just find it so interesting how, especially someone like you have all these pressures just from like people wanting to throw money at you that are advertisers or, just all these short-term things, people wanting your time and your attention. And, in a world that's shifting more and more towards this short-termism, we could call it, I think you're someone who really just lives out and teaches in a lot of ways, just by example, this long-term mindset and approach.
I appreciate it. I mean, I try to. I just think it's much more fun to play long-term games. Like, I think it's much more interesting. There's really much more strategy behind it. It's less stressful because you're not getting caught up in the FOMO of the moment on like every last thing that you're missing out on. I mean, it's very easy, whether you're on like a finance career track or on a content career track, it's very easy to get caught up in FOMO of like, so-and-so got a bigger bonus than me, or so-and-so is growing faster than me on, the vanity metrics of followers or whatever it is. But when you're playing long-term games, you actually don't care. You know what you're focused on. You know the meaning behind it. You know the purpose that you're connecting to, why you're doing it. And that's a really liberating feeling. That doesn't mean I'm perfect about this, by the way. Like, I still feel those like pings of envy or jealousy where you're like, oh man, why am I not doing that? Why haven't I pursued this, or this? But like being able to zoom out and just think about the long-term game and what you're doing and why you're doing it is really powerful. I mean, the other day I had a conversation with my wife about this. We were out on a walk and I'd gotten an email from a subscriber. I get all the emails, like everyone that replies to my newsletter comes into my inbox. So I see them and, read them. And I got an email from a subscriber who had lost his partner of many years and basically was saying how like something I had written had connected with him around this loss and how it had helped him navigate the grief of the moment. And I was just reflecting on how unbelievable it is that I can sit at my desk and write something that means something to me and have there be people around the world who I don't know that feel like it connected with them and that it positively impacted their life in some way. And I can do that and I can make money somehow doing it and like live a life that I want to live. That to me was just mind blowing. And it really recentered me at a time when I was like, oh, should I be doing this? Should I be doing that? On this long-term game of impact and actually being able to create impact and having that as a razor of anything I'm putting out content-wise, is this going to positively impact someone's life? Or is it just some BS that, I'm putting out for the sake of putting out? That was really, really powerful to me.
Mm-hmm. Have you found it difficult to, stay consistent with something like a newsletter where on the one hand, you really have to put something out to some degree, or you want to remain consistent with what you're doing. But on the other hand, you also want to make sure you're actually impacting people's lives. Has that been a difficult thing to balance?
Hey guys, I just wanted to jump in here quickly and tell you about today's sponsor. Few investments make a better long-term hedge against inflation, depression, and economic downturns than precious metals like gold and silver. And that is why I'm excited to tell you today about Noble Gold Investments. Noble Gold Investments is America's trusted provider of precious metals, as they've secured over $1 billion in precious metals for their clients. They offer physical gold and silver coins, and they even let you invest in gold and silver through an IRA, allowing you to not only protect yourself against economic calamity, but also receive tax benefits as well. Noble Gold Investments is not just a company. It's your financial guardian for life. It stands for integrity, efficiency, and the American way. And this month, with any qualifying precious metals IRA, you'll receive a free 5-ounce solid silver America the Beautiful bullion coin. That's right, a free 5-ounce silver coin. Noble Gold Investments is here to help our listeners who want to invest in gold and silver. All you have to do is go to billionairesgold.com. That's billionairesgold.com to get this exclusive offer.
Yes and no. I mean, it's like Isaac Newton's, law of motion. Like, an object in motion tends to stay in motion. And I really feel that about writing. Like, if you just write every day, ideas come somehow. Mm-hmm. And I can't explain how. Like, I actually don't know how I come up with the ideas for the newsletter because generally speaking, I don't know what I'm writing about the next week. Like on Sunday, I'll get in the sauna in the evening and I'll be kind of sitting there and thinking about it. And then I'll come up with an idea. And that's what I sit down on Monday morning and write for my newsletter that week. Mm-hmm. But I don't have some like massive pipeline of content that I'm planning to write for the next 3 months in the newsletter. Like, it's real time, inspiration driven. That's the way that I have to operate. But I think that when you're creating the movement and like flexing the muscle on a regular basis, ideas come. And so the whole thing becomes this positive loop. I'm sure there will be a time when I say like, oh, sending 2 newsletters a week feels like too much. I can't hit the quality bar on all of them the way that I want to. I haven't felt that yet. James Clear used to write 2 newsletters a week for the first 3 or 4 years that he was writing his blog, maybe even 5 years. Then he released his book, and he has switched now to a much easier 1 time a week cadence. So would I do something like that? Maybe. I really love writing it. I love the interactions that it creates with people.
On Twitter, you wrote, "Harsh truth, your big goals are destroying your happiness." What do you mean by this?
This was something that I felt after the marathon, actually. Basically, there's this paradox of goals, which is we set these big goals to go and chase, and we think that achieving that big goal is going to make us happy. We basically think, okay, when I get X, whatever the goal is, then I'll be happy, is like the syntax in our mind. And what actually happens is we've set ourselves up for like a perfect storm of unhappiness, which is either we fail to achieve the goal and we're obviously unhappy because we created this binary outcome where you like, oh, I'm going to be happy if I hit it. I'm obviously not going to be happy if I don't. So you miss it and you're not happy, or you achieve it. You get this like momentary high from achieving it where you feel great. And then you wake up the next morning and you're like, okay, I don't feel any different. What now? What now? What do I do? And you feel this unhappiness of not having a goal. You have to reset to the next thing. All the purpose kind of dissipates because you were previously driving towards this one thing. And so it's a real challenge of like setting these big goals. Big goals are important in setting our direction in my mind. Like they're sort of like a compass. Like you have this one big goal that you're driving towards. It really helps in terms of setting the direction of what you're trying to head towards. But they can be really challenging in actually, kind of regulating your happiness levels over long periods of time. And so my realization in writing that piece was I need to refocus myself on what I think of as micro goals along the way, which are like truly short-term, small little goals that, aren't something that you tie to your happiness in some big way. You're not saying like, well, when I achieve this tiny micro goal, then I'm going to be happy. They're just little things along the way that kind of keep you pushing and keep you moving forward. Because I really think that focusing entirely on big goals, it's a really, really tough thing. Big events, it's the exact same idea too. Like, oh, my wedding is a perfect example of this. Like, I don't know if you're married, but you like spend a year planning this whole thing. You're like, everything is about this one event, this one party. It's going to be so amazing. And it is. I had a best time in the world at my wedding. But then you wake up the next morning, you're like, okay, that was it. Like now we have our life and that's great. But when you've built up so much for this one moment, sometimes you can feel this like massive lull right after it. Fortunately, you might have the honeymoon after, so you kind of get the like, second push. But that's really how I've thought about big goals recently.
So you ran a marathon this year and you did it in sub 3 hours. And I think back to when I was running. This isn't an easy thing, and it's not something that happens by.
It sucked. I hated it.
It's not something that happens by accident. That's for sure. So walk us through how this works in practice.
Oh man, so I hated running my whole life. You mentioned it at the outset. I was a baseball player, so I played baseball my whole childhood. Was fortunate to get a scholarship to play at Stanford. Went out there in 2009, played 4 years at Stanford, had a great experience. Running, I was a pitcher. Running was like our punishment. So my whole life, you're like connection. It's like a mouse. You're like, you're getting punished for something. And so you start to like avoid it. Running was my punishment. Like when you did something bad practice, you lost a game, you had to run. That was the thing. And so I don't think I had ever had a positive association with running. I thought basically like if you had told me that I was ever going to run in my life, I would have told you like, hell no. Yeah, I loved lifting, loved training. I was physically fit, but always hated cardio and hated running. So at the beginning of this year, I was sort of feeling a little listless, like physically I've been doing the same lifting for a long time. I wasn't really like making any real progress at this point in my life, unless I like wanted to, go on steroids, which I'm not going to do. So I met this neighbor of mine who is a fitness influencer who's really into like hybrid training, as they call it, which is like lifting so you can be big and jacked, but then also running to be, physically fit cardiovascularly. He started getting me into the idea of running. So basically it started as like, you have a friend, you're going out for a jog, whatever. And within like a few weeks, I sort of noticed that there was like a big jump in my fitness level and in my running performance. And so that kind of got me hooked, where I was like, oh, I'm making progress at something physically again. This is fun. I'm going to keep trying to push at this. So that was back in March that we started. And basically, I decided then I'm going to try to run a sub 3-hour marathon in 6 months. Like within 6 months of starting to run was the goal I'd set. I had never run more than 5 miles in my life, by the way, is like just to have a frame of reference. So like the idea of running 26 and a sub 3 hours means you have to run it at a sub 6:51 pace for the whole marathon for 26.2 miles. So basically I like set out this like massive training plan to go and achieve that. And over the course of 6 months ran, I don't know, 1,200 miles or so in training through the like brutal summer humid season and heat. I was like going out at 5 a.m. on Sunday mornings to do these 20-mile runs. And really, really like focused on it, was super, super driven around this. And then I went out and did it. I ran my first marathon September 10th in Erie, Pennsylvania, which was beautiful. It's on this like amazing state park. And I ran 2:57:31. Nearly died doing it. Don't want to run another marathon my entire life. Was miserable, hated it. Everyone says like you run one and then you get hooked and you're going to want to run so many more. I was like, nope, count me out. Like I did it. I'm done. I'm happy to stay like half marathon and under because running I still like, but marathon distance, count me out on that going forward. But it was a hell of an experience.
Yeah, I did a half marathon. I've done a couple of them, and after the last one I did, I was very similar. Like I'd never want to do this
Yeah,
again.
half marathon is at least like, if you run a half marathon fast, you run it in like an hour 20-ish. And that's like not that long, you know, like, okay, I'm done. You know, it's like not that many songs if you're going to listen to music, or it's like a little bit of an audiobook, but 3 hours of running is just so long. Like it's so boring. The training for it, like a 3-hour training run is gruesome, and you're away from your family the whole time. So like I was doing the runs at 5 a.m. on a Sunday because I wanted to be home by the time my son was waking up, because I didn't want to like miss my entire Sunday being out. So there's like, I mean, there's also a lot of people who pick up long distance running or pick up Ironman or triathlons after their kids are older. And I think the reason for that is just because like it's so time consuming, the training, that it actually is like the right time to pick it up is later on.
One of your frameworks, mental frameworks, that has really stuck with me is, does this give me energy or does this take energy away? I think what you're kind of getting at with the running is like, you know, the trade-offs of it's just not giving you enough energy. And, you know, there are other physical activities that you can do that give you enough energy. So is that something you kind of apply universally?
Yeah. The original idea around this was actually with my calendar, like work-wise. I wanted to figure out what were the activities that gave me energy versus drained my energy. And so I color-coded my calendar. I like went after an event on my calendar and marked it red if it drained my energy, or marked it green if it created energy, and yellow if neutral. And I basically looked at my calendar, like what were the things that were killing my energy? And for me, that was mostly like Zoom calls. And what were the things that were creating a lot of energy, which was generally around like thoughtful strategic work, like talking to founders sometimes on the venture side, and then creating things, writing, creative work, reading, etc. And so that encouraged me to start to like reshape slowly what my calendar looked like, to focus on more of those energy creating activities. Because what you find is, if you're working on and spending time on things that create energy for you, you feel great. You're excited the next day. You're not like totally gassed at the end of the day. You feel good. The same rule applies to anything that you're taking on. I mean, with relationships, it's a massive one. Like if you're spending time with a bunch of people that drain your energy, whether romantically or friends, it's just a bad thing for you. I mean, if your partner drains your energy, it's probably not going to work out long term, because it's really, really hard to overcome that feeling. And with friendships, it's the same way. I mean, I had friends from like, you know, prior lives who I just noticed after spending time with them, I was drained. Like it was hard for me because we were clearly pulling in different directions. There was different energy to us. And those aren't necessarily friends that you need to keep for your whole life. And that's okay. Like that sensation of realizing that it's okay to shed relationships over time. That's okay to go different ways on things. You don't need to just accumulate in a relationship context. It's a really actually enabling and empowering thing to realize.
And I think there's something really interesting there where, you color coded your calendar or whatever. I think some people can sort of fall into a trap where they say they need to do this exercise regimen or they need to go into the office for this many hours and not thinking about it in that way where, are these actions, giving me the life that I want?
Yeah. We like create a lot of default assumptions about things we need to do just because they're the way we've done them for a long period of time. I mean, like in most organizations, there's a whole set of just like core operating principles that no one has thought to question whether that's actually the best way to do the thing because it's the way we've always done it or this is the way we do things. And you have those kind of things in your own life, like things that you assume. I mean, I, for the longest time, assumed that if I didn't have an hour to work out, might as well not work out because I wasn't going to get done what I could get done. And having a kid really changed that perception in my mind because I realized that like, oh, at 15 minutes, I can actually get a pretty darn good workout in if I have to. And it's better than doing nothing. James Clear was the one I think I first saw say this, like never let optimal get in the way of beneficial. I think about that a lot, like anything above zero compounds. And so if you go and you do 10 push-ups, it's better than none. If that's all you have time to do on the day, if you can only do 30 minutes of work, but you can really focus and lock in on it, you can get a whole hell of a lot done. I mean, I have days now where like I probably work for 2 hours, but it's hyper-focused work, and I get way more done than I used to in like 10-hour days sitting scrolling ESPN, between every meeting or whatever it was that I was doing.
Let's transition to talk more about how you think about business, how you think about investing. So I think the first question I want to ask here is, generally, how do you think about asset allocation?
So, I mean, my background is in private investing. I spent the first 7 years of my career at a middle market private equity fund, fairly traditional. We were doing leverage buyouts. We were value oriented, which was somewhat atypical at the time because, you're talking 2014 through 2021, I was there. There weren't a whole lot of middle market private equity funds doing value investing. There might have been some that said they were doing value investing, but then they were paying, 12 to 14x EBITDA. That's not really value necessarily, at least in a traditional sense of the word. We were like really doing value investing. And so I come from this background of having spent time on like, the far end of the risk reward spectrum, if you will, where we were like, it's a higher risk asset class, but we were driving really exceptional returns. I mean, the funds were returning over 20% annual IRRs. And that was where I kind of like learned about investing in a more formal context. I had spent time, like reading Buffett's shareholder letters, like learning in general terms when I was younger and in college. But that was really my first kind of formal training with investing. So what I've tried to do personally in my own life is basically like the Taleb kind of barbell strategy, where I realized that like my core job was coming from this thing that was really far out on the risk spectrum. So I wanted the rest of my life to be really far on the other end of the risk spectrum, where it was basically safe. That didn't mean for me like treasuries, by the way. I mean, at the time when I was first getting started with work, like, you were getting 0% in treasuries effectively. So it wasn't that, but I was doing the most boring, basic stuff, from an asset allocation standpoint, like Vanguard, ETFs and market index funds to sort of balance out risk profiles. So I generally, like, as I think about asset allocation, I just think about, what's like your overall mix of risk in your portfolio. Usually you have a riskier mix than you think too. I mean, I think like most of my friends, if I were to look, I would say they probably have too much risk in their portfolio. And it's probably because, all of the sexy stuff is risk. Like it's all risk on, and you're young, and like the bull market gets a lot of people, and you just start like pushing into stuff, and you don't realize that, if you actually looked at the percentages, like 80% of your portfolio is allocated to like highly risk on things. And really, as I think about it, it should be like 80% is sort of, market tracking, and 20% is like the play risk on stuff. So that's how I've tended to think about it, just in my own personal life along the way.
Yeah, I'm really curious about this because you've adopted what you essentially call Jeff Bezos' approach of turning cost centers into profit centers, where
in the business world, yeah.
Yeah, so you're starting these various businesses where, you're paying for these certain services and then starting businesses around them. So maybe you could talk about how this framework applies to your business.
Yeah. So I'll backtrack a little bit. So Jeff Bezos Amazon, what I'm referring to basically is, the whole story of Amazon Web Services and how it came to be. Which basically, like, you go back to the 1990s, Amazon was building as this e-commerce giant. At the time, it wasn't necessarily a giant, but it was growing to become one. As they were doing that, Amazon was having to build all of this in-house infrastructure to enable all of the e-commerce things on top of it that they were doing. All sorts of like compute power, storage, all of those kind of things they were having to build in-house. All of their different teams were having to like individually build it. So what they realized was they could build a shared services layer within the company that everyone would be able to draw on in order to benefit from. Soon after that, what they realized was that there were a lot of other people, like startups, software developers, that were becoming this like massive growing population that actually could really benefit from this shared services layer of storage, compute power, all this stuff that they had built. And so they turned it into a business unit. It was a thing that they had spent tons of money on internally. And what they realized was this was a cost center for them that they could actually turn into a profit center for the business. Fast forward to today, Amazon Web Services is a gargantuan business. Standalone, it would be a Fortune 100, maybe Fortune 50 company. Enormous. It has enabled the enormous explosion of startups because now a startup, rather than having to buy servers and build them out in-house, can just rent capacity from a company like AWS in order to go and grow. And so they really became an arms dealer to this massive movement and massive growth of the startup ecosystem, which is amazing in and of itself. As it applies to me and my own ecosystem in life, what I thought about was that model of cost centers into profit centers. And so as I was building out this like business around my content and my platform, I knew I didn't want to do it the traditional way. The traditional way of being a quote unquote influencer or content creator is you build an audience and you sell things to that audience. You sell courses, you sell products, you sell ad space, whatever it is. That's kind of the traditional way. And the challenge with that is it's a treadmill. I mean, you have to keep selling a new course. You have to keep selling a new product. You have to keep selling a new thing to the audience. You have to keep getting new ad in order to feed your family. And how long can you really do that for? Like, there's not a really robust set of case studies of people that have done that for 20 years, 10, 20 years, right? Like there's a few maybe, like Tim Ferriss has maybe now done it for 15, 20 years. Very few though. Because you burn out. Like, it's hard. You have to keep creating new content if you're going to do that every single day, over and over and over again. It's very challenging to do. I knew that if I was going to do this, I wanted to create something that lasted a long time, that had real longevity, and that wasn't tied to me creating new content, selling a new product, doing a new course, whatever it was. So I wanted to do things differently, basically. That was when I turned to this model that Bezos had with this cost center to profit center. I looked at my own sort of P&L and said, like, what am I spending money on a daily, weekly, monthly basis? Some of the things that jumped out to me were like video. I was doing all these short form video clips. You'll probably see a lot of this podcast in short form video. I was spending a ton of money on that. I was spending $5,000 a month at the time. It had accelerated. It was growing. It was more than that. I was spending money on like newsletter operators, people to work on the back end of my newsletter to help with growth stuff there. I'd helped a lot of friends find like ghostwriters for their content and for like, growing their own Twitter and LinkedIn presence. And I basically realized that those were all businesses I should own rather than me spending money on them. I shouldn't, I should turn those cost centers into profit centers. So I partnered with incredible operators. I don't want to go run one of these businesses, but I know I can drive leads to a business like that via my platform because I know that a lot of the people like me follow me. So what I did was I found those operators, spun up these businesses, and have now built a holding company. I mean, it's now 10 companies, sort of, like video services is one of them, newsletter growth services is one of them. There's a, kind of content creation, ghostwriting business is one of them, YouTube production studio. Like there's a bunch of these businesses, design businesses, et cetera, that collectively are now doing over 10 million in revenue, at really high profit margins because they're high ticket services businesses. And my only involvement is driving leads into these businesses via my platform. So I was effectively able to like separate my need to create on a daily basis from where I actually make money, which untethers me to like play long games, like what we talked about earlier. I don't have to think about courses and products and all these things.
So if someone else is operating the business, I can imagine some difficulty coming in with that. So I'm curious, has it been difficult for you to align the incentives of you and the operator?
No, they own the majority of the business. I mean, my like big operating principle with all of this is I want someone to really be compensated extremely well for doing great work. And if I was going to find A+ operators, they were going to need to make A+ money for doing it. And so my whole like mantra from the get-go was all I really want to focus on is strategy and like kind of direction around this stuff and driving distribution leads to the business. I don't want to be involved in like calls. I don't want to do, management, people management, all those things. That's like, this is your baby. You're going to run this and grow it. And I want you to be incentivized to do that. And so my whole thing is like, they should own over 50% of the business. They shouldn't have to call me to make decisions. If I owned 70% and they owned 30, they would feel like they needed to call me if there was a big decision. I don't want that. I want them to be empowered to go and make the decision because they are incredible operators. I'm not, actually. I would not function well in that role. And so I have been fortunate that I had a lot of those great operators in my network. There were people that I had met that I, developed relationships with over the years that I trusted, most importantly. But that has been a key unlock for me. Because I do think, if you were in a situation where it was like, hey, I want to own 100%, I'll pay you $100,000 salary, Clay, you go run this business, I'm going to be taking $1 million a year distribution from it. You'd start looking at it like, well, what the hell, what's in it for me? So I've avoided that because these people are making great money.
So tying back to my question on asset allocation, so, you mentioned the barbell approach. Ideally, a lot of your assets are in something like an index fund. So you don't have to, stay up at night worrying if your business is going to make it over the next 5, 10, however many years. How does that, work in practice when you have this holding company, you have, these other things you're doing in terms of business, and then you also have your passive investments as well?
Yeah. I mean, my overall asset allocation today, I still have the like significant chunk towards the private equity investments, right? I have all my investments from that fund. I still have, carried interest in those funds. I have my venture fund. I run a small venture fund, $10 million venture fund. I had personally made maybe like 30 or 40 venture investments prior to starting that fund. That fund has about 40 investments in it. So there's a whole allocation to private, across private equity and across venture. My businesses, I think of as like, probably like the thing I'm most in control of on a day-to-day basis and that I can, that I love to reinvest in, frankly. Like any profit coming from my newsletter, I reinvest into the growth of the newsletter. That's like a long-term game for me. I basically reinvest every dollar pre-tax and just like let that thing run with a zero net income and keep it rolling. I do take, my whole structure, my whole holding company is set up as an S Corp. So today I have a lot of leeway in terms of taking distributions from it on an ongoing basis and investing that into safer things. And so like if you were to ask me at the end of every year, you take X profit out of all of these businesses, what are you doing with it? I'm not putting it into a bunch of venture investments and private equity today. Like I'm taking a lot of that more risk on stuff that I think exists there and I'm putting it into things that I think are safer. Right now with, treasuries paying 5.5% or whatever they're paying, like that's pretty attractive to me. As far as just kind of like holding cash and feeling like you're in a stable position.
So as the businesses with the holding companies, has those tended to work out pretty well just because you've built out a relationship with someone you believe is a high quality business person, have a high degree of ethics?
Yes. The biggest businesses within the holding company today are services based. So there are kind of two failure points with a services-based business, like with this type of one that we're running. One would be failure to scale. Like very easy to get to, call it $1 million of annual revenue with one of those businesses. If it's a $5,000 to $10,000 a month service, it's just not that many clients. And so you can get to that. The big challenge is going from $1 million to like 5 and then 5 to 10. That's where like, do you actually have systems in place? Do you have a team? Do you have all the things you need to really build a real business? $1 million, that could be a one-person business. Like there's plenty of people I know that are running little $1 million like personal businesses, super happy. They're taking $500,000 a year, in profit. That's an amazing life. You can do great doing that if you have that one core skill. It's not that interesting to me, right? Like I don't want a whole bunch of $1 million businesses in this portfolio long-term. I want it to be an $100 million plus holding company. And so that you're not going to get there doing $1 million business. It's just a headache. So that's one failure point. The other failure point is you are poor at servicing clients. and you actually just do a bad job, clients churn, it's reputation risk, it's all of those things. I'm much more focused on that. If that is happening, there's a huge issue. If there's a failure to scale, maybe we part ways, maybe buy someone out, like, hey, this is kind of, you should keep running this, but it doesn't really make sense for me. That's like an easier issue to address. Failure to really deliver on a client value proposition is what I'm much more focused on and what I want to make sure we remedy very quickly with any of these companies. Haven't really seen it yet. There's always churn with services businesses, but never like, what you really want to focus on is like bad faith churn. Like, did you not deliver on the thing you said you were going to deliver on? And most of the time it's like expectation setting at the outset is what kind of fixes those issues. But we haven't had a bunch of issues to date, which is great. I'm very fortunate again that there's some incredible operators that are doing a really good job and they're building a service that is valuable fundamentally.
As we've touched on here, you've been incredibly successful in many of these different areas and phases of your life. And you seem to be really driven to want to operate at a high level. And I'm actually currently reading Walter Isaacson's new biography on Elon Musk. And it's so clear when you look at someone like Elon, he's just so successful in these business pursuits. But you look at the other areas of his life and, he's making some tremendous sacrifices. And, just off the top of my head, he's been married a few times, countless periods of his life where he's had this mental and physical stress and he's in so many sleepless nights. So there's really no balance with someone like Elon. Like all he does is just work on his Tesla, SpaceX all the time. And then he goes and buys Twitter. And then I look at you and you're spending all this time with your family. I saw just yesterday you posted a video of you and your son sitting on the sidewalk just watching the trucks go by. So
Every day.
Yeah. So it's amazing to me how you found this balance where you're operating at a really high level, yet you're still able to make time for things like your family, make time for the people you care about. So has it been difficult for you to, find that balance and strike the right balance of what's right for you?
It's definitely difficult. The first thing I would say is that the world needs Elon Musk's very much. I mean, people like Elon Musk, like Steve Jobs, like Leonardo da Vinci way back in all these Isaacson biographies that he's written. The world needs people that are willing to sacrifice everything else in their life to drive humanity forward, to drive technology forward, whatever it is. And we all benefit from the people like that existing. I don't want to be one of them. And that is liberating for me to realize. For many years, I thought I wanted to be one of them, but it was driven by ego. It was driven by a desire to sound successful externally, not by what I actually wanted. And so that, like separating that and realizing that I can derive meaning and purpose from something entirely different from what, mainstream success might look like, is really, really liberating. I mean, the wealthiest I ever feel is being able to at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday, sit on the sidewalk with my son watching trucks go by because I have the flexibility that I've built into my life to do that I can actually go and do that and spend time with him and be there during this period of his life when I'm like a huge influence and we have a huge connection. So that's the first thing. I mean, it's there's no wrong or right way to live your life. In my mind, the whole thing is like, figure out what you want. What do you actually care about? And try to design a life that prioritizes those things. It's also the realization that your life has seasons and it's okay to optimize and prioritize different things across different seasons of your life. I'm writing a book about this right now, about, the different types of wealth and how to build and balance wealth in these different areas. And that is the big thing that keeps coming to the top of my mind is that concept of seasons, and that early in your life, you might want to prioritize building, financial rails and financial stability and structure for the rest of your life. It might be that you have to sacrifice your friendships. You have to sacrifice some of your physical health. You have to sacrifice some of these other areas of your life in order to do that. But there will be a season, like when your kids are really young, when you might want to sacrifice the financial pursuits in order to really develop that depth of connection with your child, with your spouse, whatever it might be. And having the flexibility and thinking about that along the way so that you can make an actually clear, rational decision is everything to me. It's not me telling you what the right answer is. You might not want to do the things that I'm doing. You might not want balance in the way that I define it. What you need to do is figure out what your balance is that you want and then try to design a life that fits around that. I also just think separating purpose from job is so important for everybody to do. We're told as we're growing up and, by different gurus here and there that you have to find your purpose and you have to be working on your purpose. And I think it's stupid. The idea that your purpose has to come from work is it's dumb. It's not true. You can have a purpose that's tied to you being a provider for your family, to you being a protector and a provider for your family. And you might want to connect that purpose to your work. You might want to say, like, I'm going and I'm working 2 jobs right now because I am a provider for my family. And that's connecting it to your purpose. But your purpose had nothing to do with the work itself. You might be working, on an assembly line. You might hate that work. But if it's connected to the purpose of providing, you might take a lot of fulfillment and a lot of joy from that. So separating those two is really, really important.
Mm-hmm. One thing that's also interesting, I think I just recently went on a trip, a number of entrepreneurs and people I'm sort of connected with through the podcast here attended this and got to know a lot of amazing people. And, someone that's very financially successful and done very well. And I'm sure he's like you, where he just enjoys helping people out and doing advising and, consulting type roles. And, everyone kind of had a question set they had to answer. And one of the questions was, what's your most difficult challenge right now? And for him, it was saying no to things. And, I'd imagine that's a struggle for you too, where, people are constantly, wanting your time, your attention, your expertise. Are there any tricks you have to dealing with, saying no to things and, respecting those boundaries?
Yeah. I'm getting better at it. I would say I'm still not great at it. Part of that is because I self-define as being a nice person. And there's a challenge with self-defining as being a nice person, which is you default to yes on things when people ask for help, especially young people, because it's not, I'm 32. It's not that long ago that I was in their shoes and asking for help from people. And so when someone reaches out to me and asks for, a 30-minute call or coffee or whatever it might be, my default is to feel like I should say yes to that. What I've only recently realized is that every yes to one of those things is a no to my son and to my wife. And that has been the most helpful way to think about it. That has completely changed how I've been able to do it. Because my wife even will say to me like, oh, well, don't be a jerk. You should say yes to these things. And I try to explain to her recently, every time I do that, it's energy directly taken away from energy that I can give to you and Roman, our son. And framing it that way makes it much easier to say no to these things because you realize it's not like I'm creating energy and then deploying it into this thing. It has to come from somewhere. You have a fixed amount of energy in your day. And so if you already feel like, oh, I'm tapped, I'm full, it has to get reallocated. And if it's right now getting reallocated from time with my son, from being able to sit there and be present with him because my mind is elsewhere, that's not worth it to me in most cases. So that has been really helpful, is just figuring out like, what has to give? If I'm going to say yes to this, what am I going to say no to by saying yes to this new thing? And if that's something that really matters, no, I don't want to make that trade-off. I don't want to say no to that thing. So that has been really helpful. The other one that's just like a really simple heuristic is when someone invites you to something, think about if you would do it today. Like if I get invited to something a month from now, if you say like, hey, do you want to come to this dinner a month from now? Or even actually this podcast, right? Like you said, hey, like, do you want to do this podcast? I think this was like 3 months ago that we scheduled it. And you said, do you want to do this podcast? And I thought about it in my mind, would I do that? If he said, hey, come on this podcast tomorrow, would I go do it? And the answer was yes. So I said yes to it. If the answer is no, if you wouldn't do it tomorrow, you're not going to want to do it 3 months from now. And like one of the biggest issues in our own mind, decision-making wise, is we have a terrible time thinking about what we're going to be like in the future. So we always assume we're going to have more time and energy in the future. We're like, oh, things are really busy now.
I'll make the time.
Yeah, in December, I'm going to be like, I'm going to feel free. Everything's going to be great. Like I'm going to have gotten through this big project that I'm working on. I'm going to feel great. So yeah, I'm gladly going to commit to that dinner. Then inevitably December comes, you're miserable, busy, low energy. And you're like, why did I agree to going to this thing? And so thinking about that, like, would I say yes to this if it was tomorrow or today, is a really helpful heuristic as well.
And another thing I've sort of realized, I recently interviewed Shane Parrish for his new book.
Yeah.
And
it's a great book.
You guys, I think you've really, you understand what's most important, and then you're making time on your calendar for those things. You know, you need to write your newsletter or consume content or whatever else. You're taking that time block and putting it on your calendar. And then you're also huge on Parkinson's law. You know, work expands or contracts to the amount of time you give it. And I think that's just so powerful, where you've prioritized these things outside of work. You ensure you're making time for those, but then you're, you know, using Parkinson's law to your advantage, blocking out that time and, you know, setting a cutoff for that work to be done.
Yeah. I mean, I try to create, I think Arthur Brooks, who I've admired for a long time and now I'm fortunate getting to work with him on a few things, has talked about like ventilating your schedule. I've actually never seen him write about this, but I went to his happiness seminar that he does at Harvard Business School once, and he talked about this, like ventilating your schedule, like creating space in it, almost like blowing air into it, where you have these kind of flex periods in between things that are on there. Because the alternative is like jam back-to-back stuff where you never really recover. You never have those like moments of thought that kind of allow you to like experience new things, think, and frankly, just like experience daily beauty in your world. There's this famous story of the world-renowned violin player Joshua Bell had just like performed at Boston Symphony Hall to a sold-out audience, thousands of dollars a ticket. And he took his $3 million violin and went into a Washington, D.C. subway and started playing, sitting there like wearing a hat. And out of like 1,000 people that walked by him, like 5 people stopped to hear the best violin player in the damn world playing in the subway. And it was just an example to me of 2 things, really. One, presentation matters. So like you take the beautiful thing and it's put in this different context and you don't notice how beautiful it is. But 2, we're too damn busy. I mean, people don't have the time to stop and listen to the most beautiful music in the world being played right in front of them because we're just constantly rushing from point A to point B. Everything has a destination. Everything has a purpose that we're driving towards. And we're not able to enjoy that like flow in the interim along the way. There's this poem that I love by Constantine Cavafy. It's called Ithaca. It's about Odysseus. At the end of the Trojan War, like, you know, it's the Odyssey. Like he has to come home from the Trojan War back to Ithaca, his homeland. And the poem is all about that concept of like, don't be mad at Ithaca because Ithaca gave you this journey. Like if not for Ithaca and the thing that's pulling you to home, you wouldn't have had this incredible journey along the way. And it's really that, you know, the moral of it and the concept is like this concept of enjoy that journey and enjoy that process. And those like moments along the way are what everything is about, not the destination. And I think we all need to do a better job of internalizing that, like just creating space in our lives to actually enjoy those day-to-day moments.
How do you think about content you consume? How do you ensure you're, you know, continually consuming high quality content?
I would say I have like a pretty consistent list of, I don't know, 10 or so people that no matter what they put out, I'll read it. That keeps kind of a good like baseline downside protected level of content per week that I feel like is really good and interesting. And beyond that, then I really rely on like the wisdom of the crowd from a content perspective, where tons of people send me stuff now. I mean, I get like my email list, people send me tons of articles. I get, you know, tagged in a bunch of stuff like, hey, this is interesting. People send it to me. I have a bunch of friends who I really trust who send me things that they're reading that's interesting. And I've basically put it out to all these people that I think are really smart, interesting thinkers, different thinkers from how I think about the world, like different perspective sets. I basically ask them, like, anytime you come across something interesting, send it to me. Don't hesitate. Like, I might not reply to you, but I got it. Just send it to me. And that has really helped a lot. Just like having basically like this like army of consumers out there that'll send me things that they come across that are already pre-vetted that I know are interesting.
Is there anything in the business or entrepreneurship realm that comes to mind?
Reading wise?
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of one that would be different from what everyone would already know. There's a woman, Ann Lee Kunf. I'm going to mispronounce her last name. But writes. It's called Ness Labs. Is her her blog. That is fantastic. She's an incredible writer. I think she's writing a book right now, which I'm excited about. She's probably one that's like more off the radar that I really enjoy.
And then talk more about your book and what you're working on and when that might be coming out?
Well, we're sitting here in late 2023. Hopefully, I don't really want to publish it in the middle of the presidential election, which is what the normal timeline would be based on manuscript delivery. So I need to think about whether we try to pull it up in front of that, like more like summer 2024, or if I wait until like more January 2025. But the book is about wealth and redefining wealth beyond money. Something we've talked about in various terms, but really thinking about building out a broader framework for thinking about how to build and balance wealth across the different seasons of your life. And the idea is for it to be both theory and tactics. And so every section of the book has a set of what I would consider kind of the gold standard tactics for building that type of wealth within your life. So the things that I've sort of battle tested along the way that I know work, and that, that I think, the implementation of one of them would really impact your life, and, 10 of them would dramatically impact your life.
Got it. Well, Sahil, thanks so much.
Yeah, thank
this
you.
is the first in-person interview. And before we close it out, how can people get connected with you if for some reason they don't follow you already?
Yeah. Fortunately, I have a weird name, so it's easy to find me. I'm at Sahil Bloom, basically on every platform. And then my newsletter is called The Curiosity Chronicle. You can find it at my website, which is sahilbloom.com.
Awesome. Well, thanks again so much.
Yeah,
really,
man.
appreciate it.
As an investor, how can you be best prepared to survive the periodic severe bear market corrections and the future bear markets in your lifetime? Ensure that you have tennis balls or high quality stocks in your portfolio and not eggs or junk quality bad stocks, which will splatter after hitting the floor. Many individuals make large paper fortunes in bull markets, but eventually lose all of it when the bear market ultimately arrives. During the bear market crash, both quality and junk stocks fall. Quality eventually bounces back to all-time highs after the recovery, whereas the junk stocks never recover or lie low for many, many years. How much you're able to retain after the recovery from a bear market is far more important than how much paper profit you make during a bull market.